Your first reaction when you saw that video?
Well, clearly there is a big suggestion of huge hypocrisy at the top of the leadership of this country, and that's very disappointing. And it's obviously not the first time. And the idea that there's a one set of rules for the rest of us and then another for them is disappointing, to say the least.
Yeah.
However,
is it shocking? I mean, is it shocking?
Well, not
are you
shocking.
surprised that people didn't understand? I've written articles before about having very well sourced numerous cabinet ministers and special advisors confirming to me that no one, for instance, was wearing masks in Number 10 when there was mask mandates, that they weren't social distancing, that they were having get-togethers on a Friday evening. I mean, this didn't come as a surprise to me, but having the sort of the evidence, such as this is evidence laid out before us, kind of brings it home quite a lot.
Yes, I take a slightly contrarian view, which is that probably a lot of those people were themselves sceptical about a lot of the restrictions.
Yeah.
And as you know, I have been. And I think perhaps they didn't even believe them themselves.
But this is the key thing.
Follow the rules.
I've made this point. I made this point on Twitter last night. I've been making this point on air all morning. That a lot of people are interpreting this as this is terrible because people were dying of COVID and people's lives were ruined. They weren't able to see their families. Their businesses were closed. And while we were doing all of that, they were having a party. Cheese and wine. Call it a party. Secret Santa. It's a party. But actually, the argument is not that. The argument is that they knew the rules weren't necessary and they knew they weren't vital to keep themselves safe, but they imposed those rules on the rest of us anyway while they didn't obey them. The crucial message we should read from this, well, Number 10, no one wearing their masks, G7 summit and all of that, and all of these different rules when it comes to a G7 summit or a COP26 summit in terms of isolating and COVID tests and all of that. And when it comes to this party, the key message is they don't obey the rules themselves because they know they're not necessary, but they seem to think they're necessary for the rest of us. How do you square that?
Well, you can't, can you? I think in their hearts they realise the restrictions are disproportionate and pretty ineffective. And it's rules for rules' sake. It's people, be they experts or politicians, thinking they can control the virus, which is endemic, as we know. And in a funny way, if this sort of incident means that people pay less attention to the safetyism of society at the moment, then I'm not sure that's a terrible thing, because I think we need to recover from the fear. We need to regain our lives and move on. And we are allowing every new piece of evidence, be it a new variant or whatever it is, to scare us rigid. We rush back and hide in our homes. We have to go out. We have to be allowed to travel. We have to recover our freedoms. We cannot afford other lockdowns. We have 2.4 billion in debt. There won't be furlough and all the other bungs this time round. So, we cannot, even if we believe lockdowns and these restrictions were effective, we can't afford them.
We couldn't afford it. And again, all the evidence is that not. Again, most of the countries that have the strictest lockdowns, who've had the most, the mask mandates. I mean, in Germany, the N95 medical grade mask mandated from January onwards, vaccine passports, all of these different measures which we're told are vitally important for public health measures. And here they are seeing a massive big spike in cases at the current time. The biggest lesson everyone needs to learn from this is that our previous planning, the pandemic planning that we did, which was advised by the World Health Organization, was actually the right planning, and the countries that have followed that have actually ended up, certainly by now, doing an awful lot better. We take Sweden and some other notable examples. But this is it. We are heading into similar territory as we were last year in terms of cases going up, people being anxious, new variant, lots of concern, booster jabs instead of the first jabs going into people's arms the first time last year. And yet there seems to be, among the media in particular, and many politicians, an absolute refusal to recognise how much better off we are in terms of the protection we have from the vaccines, which work, those who are elderly and vulnerable from the boosters, the young people who are largely getting COVID at the moment being, at very, very, very tiny risk of any even serious illness, let alone death. It's sweeping through primary schools at the moment. I don't know anyone who's concerned about their child at primary school getting COVID. We seem to be totally unwilling to to accept that we do need to learn to live with this virus. People, so many people, and particularly people in the media, seem to be desperate for us not to. What do you make of that?
I don't know. A lot of people seem to be trapped in a sort of doom loop of fear and panic and disproportionate attention to one particular disease. We cannot run society on the basis that every few weeks or months we shut it down to save the NHS. Yeah. It cannot continue. We have to get it into proportion. We have to realise there is vast collateral damage from all these restrictions, that people must be allowed to go out. We cannot have academic scientists and politicians micromanaging our lives. We have given away too many of our freedoms. We need to regain those, regain our lives. You know, ultimately, parties are about human relationships. Human relationships are the root of all happiness and well-being. And we have to understand that constant fear from the media and politicians trying to scare us is itself deeply unhealthy and creating a ludicrously over-anxious society that is simply not good for us on any level.
And that's the thing I find so frustrating when people look at this number 10 video. They're saying this is outrageous because people were dying of COVID. You shouldn't have been having a party, as opposed to reading it the right way, which is that the people who are imposing the rules on us and enforcing those rules on us didn't think the rules were necessary. There has been such a demand for something to be done. This is something, let's do this, to assuage demands in the media because there's so much focus on COVID deaths. And still, to this day, not enough focus on all the people dying of heart disease and strokes and cancer, the 740,000 missed cancer referrals from GPs over the period of time. The Ofsted report yesterday, which is, virtually every single child has lost out due to their education. Some young children, not even learning to speak properly because of the lockdown. The long-term repercussions of this, not even economically, but just on health alone, are off the scale. And yet these things are still reported as if they're completely separate from a government policy that made them happen.
Exactly. Knee-jerk restrictions because there is, as you say, a demand that something must be done and a view that we can control the virus. We can't control the virus. We have got vaccinated to a very large degree. An extraordinary proportion of people have had at least 2 vaccinations. There are the booster jabs going on. I'm going to get mine immediately after this call. And I think that, ultimately, we are all mortal. And this obsession, this morbid obsession with disease and death, particularly one disease, is itself becoming a disease. And we have to recapture the joy of life and realize that hiding away indoors, being afraid, watching the daily toll of COVID is not the way ahead. It can't be right.
Oh, you're speaking for a nation. You really are. The quiet minority who've just got on with their lives and just want the rest of their lives back and having their families and their work and travel and all the things that make life worthwhile.